Good morning. This book records observations made by a physician at Zurich of the Great Comet of 1472. The book was printed at Venice in 1474, less than 20 years after the invention of printing. At the end of the book, we find the publisher's imprint. It tells us that the book was printed by Hans Arl in the year 1474. The place of printing is not mentioned, but researchers have established that the types used in this text were already being used at Venice in 1471. This copy is still in its original binding, which is unusual for such slim books, which were often bound together with other short tracts and subsequently rebound separately. As you can see, each of the wooden boards that make up the covers is as thick as the text itself. Because this book was never rebound, the margins were never trimmed, and the text was neither washed nor pressed, so it remains very fresh and attractive. You can even feel the bite of the type in the pages when you run your hands over it. The first and final leaves in the book are blank. These are integral to the book, but were left blank by the printer. When books such as this were rebound, these leaves were often taken out and discarded. This is a perfect, complete copy of this book, including these integral blanks. Another nice feature of this book is the presence of thin strips of vellum reused from a medieval manuscript and used here to strengthen the sewing of the book. This one has come loose so we can take a good look at it. You'll also see that the original brass corner pieces and clasp are still preserved. As for the text itself, it is divided into two parts. The first is a discussion of comets in general. The second concerns the comet of 1472. I should mention here that much of what was written about comets in the Renaissance concerned prognostica, that is to say, astrological prediction. This text is different, for while the author includes prognostications, his primary interest is scientific. The tone is set on the very first page, where, citing Aristotle, the author admonishes the uneducated to refrain from opining on subjects about which they know nothing. The text proper begins with a consideration of how comets are formed and of what substances they are made. These were topics about which there was no consensus, and it is not surprising that the author looks for analogues in another topic that was being avidly investigated, namely the formation of minerals. Next, we turn to the question of cometary motion. The question was whether comets exist and operate beyond the moon's orbit or between the Earth and the moon. That is to say, whether they are celestial or atmospheric phenomena. Over here, he begins to discuss their shapes, their sizes, and their composition. In this chapter, the author describes a mathematical method for calculating the size of a given comet, and it is this method that he will employ later in the text when discussing the comet of 1472. Here is the divisional title page to the second part, which reads, "The second part is a discussion of, in particular, the comet that appeared in 1472. This section starts off with a bit of scientific debate, where the author refutes the conclusions that one of his contemporaries has drawn from his own observations of the comet. On this page, he discusses the motion of this particular comet, both its speed and its trajectory. Here, he writes that he first observed it on the calends of January, that is, January 13th, between the constellations of Libra and Virgo. He then traces its path all the way through the month of March. Here, he moves on to a discussion of the comet's tail. As we know, comets' tails are really illuminated trails of gas and dust being vaporized by solar radiation. So whatever the comet's path, the tail will always be facing away from the sun. These next 3 chapters, on the comet's distance from the Earth, on its size, and its celestial longitude, are the ones that really set this book apart. Here we have, for the first time, a contemporary author making scientific calculations about a natural phenomenon that he himself has observed. And even had this work not been printed in his lifetime, the achievement of this author would still have had great significance. For not even his teacher, the renowned mathematician and astronomer George Purbach, or his contemporary, the great Regiomontanus, had applied these calculations to this phenomenon. The only other published work on this comet, printed in 1472, consisted of prognostica only. This really is a very special book.